Hey guys, welcome to the Mitch and Murray podcast. This is episode 1, and my name is Thomas Wilmer, and this is my big bro and business partner, Dan Manili. We are Pennsylvania real estate brokers and investors, and we love everything about the real estate game. On this podcast, we're going to be talking about topics that we like to talk about, which is investing, real estate, our experiences in flipping and buying and holding properties, and we're also going to touch on our experiences in dealing with contractors. So let's get into it. In today's discussion, episode 1, buying a primary residence versus renting somewhere to live and using the money that you were going to put on the down payment to buy the home and investing that money into buying a multifamily, a duplex, a triplex, a quad, something to create passive income and get that cash flow going. Dan and I believe that instead of buying a primary residence, you should use that down payment money. Dan and I believe that we were all programmed as a society that this was the way. Get a job, save your money, and buy a house. We're going to get into today why we believe that, yes, you should buy some sort of property, but the main thing you should get involved in is a multifamily house. And when you are thinking about buying a home, the first thing that comes up is the mortgage. Dan, what's a mortgage?
So the history, we just looked, we've been talking about this for the last couple of days. You could do a quick search on ChatGPT, look at the history of mortgages. I learned a little bit, like going back to the 1800s, how it looked in our country. It changed over the years, and then there was the Great Depression. It kind of changed after that. Our current climate for mortgages kind of became very popular in the 1950s, and it was created for the masses. And look, we can get into the details of what people think happened as far as the economy goes, and we just talked about the war and the GI Bill. But ultimately, the reason that there exists the mortgages that we see now in our country is for the sole purpose of banks making money. This was sold as an idea, and we'll get into it, but this was sold as an idea of let's create something to lend money on. And the more money a bank can lend, the more money they can make. So what they really created wasn't to buy a home necessarily. They created an idea. And the idea, you'll be familiar with it because we hear it all the time. The American dream. What is the American dream? Own a house, put a fence around it, get a car, and have a couple kids. That was sold by the banks. The banks came up with this idea. And the reason they sold this idea is because if we can get people to buy into this dream, they'll want to go buy a house. And if they need to go buy a house, they'll have to come to us for a mortgage. And we could charge them interest over a 30-year term. So that's the, idea, the history, the quick history. But let's just look at the averages. Again, you could go to ChatGPT and look at this. The average mortgage in our country, the average mortgage lasts between 7 and 12 years, I think it says. So that means people either buy another house, they move every 7 to 12 years, or they refinance, but most people are not keeping mortgages more than 12 years. The average price in our country for a home is $400,000. Average down payment at 5% would be around $20,000. Average principal and interest is around $2,400 a month at 6.5% over a 30-year term. And then you got your taxes and insurance, which could be anywhere, let's say the taxes are around 1% of the property price. That's over $4,000 a year. And your insurance is probably over $2,000 a year. Then there's PMI. If you're only putting 5% down, then you got to get PMI, which stands for private mortgage insurance, which that also has a cost to it. Sometimes expensive, could be $500 or $600 a month.
But then with the PMI, was that always around, or did the banks come up with that in recent years?
Well, that got created to give the banks a little bit of leverage for the foreclosure market, because when you're putting, when a buyer or a borrower is putting less money down, they have less skin in the game. And the banks needed some protection, and the insurance industry came in to say, hey, we'll insure this loan up to or down to a certain percentage of the.
So basically, instead of the banks paying to protect themselves, they force it on the buyer to pay for them.
Correct, and their have more coverage, but the buyer has to pay for it.
Gotcha.
Because the buyer's doesn't have enough skin in the game. So you look at these costs, and then there's hidden costs, and this is really, people never really talk about this, but there's closing costs on the way in. So when you want this American dream and you buy a house, you have to pay things like recording fees, transfer taxes, then you have to pay real estate commissions, and then title insurance and title fees. These are all requirements from the lenders. The lenders are not going to lend you the money. We have the golden rule in real estate. The golden rule is he who has the money makes the rules. The bank has the money. So the bank is making the rules, and they're forcing people to pay these closing costs. And then think about this that always comes up, people don't realize, when the roof needs to be replaced, or the kitchen, or the windows, or the heating system, or the carpets, or the floor. And when people buy a house, you know what they're doing? Let's paint. Let's do this. Let's add carpets. All those costs add up and deduct from what you think is going to be a profit center for you. And then, even after you get into some of that stuff, there's ongoing maintenance, like lawn care, shoveling, snow removal, upkeep for your systems, your HVAC system, your plumbing, your electrical system, your bathrooms and kitchens. So those costs go on and on and on. And the cost for getting a contractor, you get contractors, the cost could be vary greatly. But then you got costs like taxes and insurance that are never going down, and they're never going away. So even if you did stay in your house for 30 years, you're not paying, and you pay off the mortgage, you still are incurring these costs that are going to continue to go up. So we look at those numbers, and then we look at, and the reason why this is our topic is because we want younger people or people that are looking, we also have another saying, it's never too late to invest. So we don't care if you're younger or older, but especially younger people that are, we don't want you to be brainwashed anymore by the system to say, buy into the American dream. If you're 21, 22, 23 years old, and you're being told, get a job, save your money, buy a house, we're saying something different. We're saying invest your money. And there's a big difference, and we're going to talk about these two terms. There's a big difference between what is an investment and what is a liability. So let's look at an investment. What is an investment? Well, an investment means you're taking your money, you're investing it in something, and you're hoping, the idea is to get a return so that you're making money. What is a liability? A liability is something that's taking money from you. So when you get a house and you have a mortgage, you're coming out of pocket every month. You're spending money every month. That is the definition of a liability. It's costing you money. Now there's some hope that someday later you'll make money somehow, which we've convinced our society that that's the way that it works, which it really doesn't work that way. That's a lie that we're going to expose, constantly in this in this podcast. But we want people to move away from liability and to move more into making an investment and getting a return. And like Thomas talked about, maybe once you have some return on your investment, all right, then maybe you spend the money into buying liabilities. So that being said, now we're going to get into more of the psychology behind this. I mean, we gave you a quick rundown of the numbers, and we're going to talk about the difference between buying and renting.
Before we move on, what people also got to understand is, what's the monetary value of the peace of mind? Like, me and you both rent. Right now, we own homes too, but when you can call someone and say, hey, listen, my garbage disposal isn't working. Hey, my roof, there's a leak in my roof. What's the monetary value on that? Yeah, the peace of mind.
That is something that, there is a component of this. It's like the quality of life. Because all of these items, there's a monetary piece to it where you go, and they're all costs that people forget. Mm-hmm. Like when the person sells the home 7, 12 years later, even 30 years later, when they sell the home, they're looking at the net from the sale, but they're not remembering, oh, I paid $5,000 for my roof. I paid $40,000 for my kitchen. I paid $22,000 for my HVAC system. Well, Thomas and I, we're never incurring those expenses because we're also not spending the time and energy
thinking
about it, calling contractors, getting bids, fighting with people, getting people to come into the house, and then we don't like what they did, and then there's a nightmare. My HVAC system goes down, I make one phone call, it's usually fixed that day. If I have a leak, I make a phone call, somebody comes and takes care of it. So really there is a component of like peace of mind and quality of life that is probably, not spoken of enough. But, at the end, people will always look to, well, what is the cost? And these costs are always kind of forgotten about when they go to resell. They don't remember all of these costs,
And another thing, see, we're in the game, we're in the business, but it's 1,000% truthful, and it's a fact that homeowners get screwed by contractors.
All the time.
If a Philadelphia row home, a rubber roof, we probably can get it done for about $3,500.
Depending, brand new, but sometimes less.
Okay, less. But just say it's $3,500. We know people personally that came to us and told us that, hey, listen, I had a roof problem, rubber roof, and I got charged $8,000.
Yeah.
So it's a lot different for a homeowner versus an investor too, because you're going to be in the business and you get better prices.
Yeah. All right, so let's go into this. The difference investing. We're telling people to invest in. What are we really saying? No, don't buy a home. Or are we saying, when you can, buy an investment property? And what's the benefit of that compared to like being a primary homeowner? What's really happening?
So there's benefits, there's negatives, and everything. But to me, the most beneficial aspect of becoming a landlord or an investor is the cash flow. You get to free up, yourself with being able to afford something in the future. Whether it's someone that's first getting into buying a home or an investment property, and they're creating the positive cash flow coming in, where maybe in 2 or 3 years they can get another property. And I don't know, but put it this way: a young person that's getting out of college, just coming into the workforce, and most of the time it's a single person. They can probably buy a duplex, rent the top out or the bottom, and they can live in either or. In 2 or 3 years, they can probably go and buy another duplex, and within those 5 years, a person can probably have 2 or 3 properties that's creating a positive cash flow, and they can use that money to go buy their dream home versus buying a Philadelphia row home that's in an area that you don't really want to live, and you can rent somewhere for those 5 years.
Now, and also you got to consider, along with the positive cash flow, there still would be a mortgage on the property. The mortgage is getting paid down every month by the rent that you're getting. And you're also looking at the possible appreciation of that asset over time, just like you would in a home. But instead, now you're actually taking money in every month instead of spending money every month. And you're getting a tax deduction on that income. So although you're making money, there is a way, once you get into business, you'll find out that there's something called depreciation, and you're going to depreciate the asset that you have. See, that's something that you don't get when you have a primary residence. You don't get to depreciate it because it's not technically an asset, it's a liability. But when you have an investment, you can depreciate it, and that takes away from or deducts from what your actual income is. So, look, this is something that we're trying to tell people to do, is what Thomas just said. Buy a duplex. Buy an investment property. And there's going to be we'll get into this, there's going to be some objections, but people say they don't want to be a landlord. And maybe this isn't for everybody, but let's not fool ourselves into thinking this is a great idea to be a homeowner. Because when it all shakes out, and we could sit down with you and do the numbers and look at a 30-year time frame of somebody and what they spent compared to what they actually made. You sell a house right now, in Philadelphia, you're paying 8 to 10% in closing costs. Nobody talks about that. So if you're selling a $400,000 house, that's $40,000 right off the top, and you spent money to get into it. So it's not always what it seems, especially if there's like this generational programming of this is the way. buy a house, live in it for 30 years and have a family, and you're not even thinking. You're not even thinking for yourself. You're just doing what your parents told you to do. So
you can also get out of your lease every 10 months.
Yeah, you can get out of it. And that's another thing people will say, well, you're not guaranteed to stay there. But in the communities where we live, they're not selling these places. They're renting. It's a rental community. So I've been in my place for 5 years, So yeah, you can also vacate. The main thing though is compared to renting compared to buying too, you don't need to come up with all that money. Usually you need to come up with a small security deposit, compared to buying a house, going through the mortgage process, making a down payment, paying the closing costs. All of that adds to the money out of pocket.
And another thing that I want you to touch on too, a good buyer in today's market. Okay, I know we're talking about putting 5% down, but if Dan's putting a property on the market in a pretty good neighborhood, he's not really going to be looking at a person that's putting down 5%. Mostly a good buyer, they're putting down 20% at least.
Yeah.
So on a $400,000,
that's $80,000.
So the numbers are a lot more. That $80,000, if you put it in the S&P 500 right now, in 20 years, how much would it be?
Yeah, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars. Where that's another component of this is that people come up with significant money to use as a down payment. That money is gone. So it's now they might say, well, it's equity in my house. Certainly it is. But you know what it's akin to? Getting a box, putting $80,000 in the box and burying it in your backyard. Because that's essentially what's happening. The equity that people have in their home is in their home. So they don't have access to it. They're not getting anything from it. So they can't invest it and make money. And that is the biggest deterrent for me to try to tell younger people, or my daughter, go buy a property, save your money, let's put together 50, 60, 70 grand, save all your money, and then go put it into a house where you're going to get no return ever. And even people do think later, like you'll see people that have a home and they'll say something, well, hear this, well, my home's paid off, right? Oh, great. So, and I hate to say it like this, but it's almost the dumbest thing in the world because basically you're saying you have $400,000
and you're not making no money on it,
and you're getting zero, and actually you're getting negative. It's hurting you because of inflation.
Taxes.
Yeah,
no matter what.
Yeah, you're paying taxes and insurance, but your money is being deflated because you're fighting inflation.
Right.
So not only are you getting nothing for it, it's becoming less valuable. Whereas if you had the $400,000 in your hand, couldn't you invest it in something? Right. Even if you invested it in something safe. Like we talked to a financial guy, he promises me he can get me into an investment right now at fixed, guaranteed 6.5% that I can get for my 400 grand. So that's 30. It's almost 30 grand. 20 some $1,000, just minimally that you're losing. So if you do have equity in your home and you paid it off, and you're just nonchalantly thinking I'm doing great, you're losing $25,000 a year minimum. Right off the bat, every year in and year out.
Yep. But there's always arguments to what we have. There's always arguments what we believe into this real estate thing with buying a multifamily. But you're going to have objections like you still have to pay rent. You still make money when you sell your property. What would you say about that?
Well, there is a component where people will say, well, if you want me to not buy a home, I'm still going to have to pay rent. And it's true. You're going to have to pay rent, or you're going to, like we're saying don't do that. We're saying buy a property that's a multifamily for early and live in part and rent the other part. But let's say you're going to do what we're doing. We're still paying rent. So it looks like that cost is still happening. But that cost doesn't include taxes, it doesn't include insurance, it doesn't include interest, it doesn't include PMI, it doesn't include repairs. So when people say that, they're just not factoring in all the variables and they're not looking at every expense that they're making. So,
the place where you live, your bills are minimal.
Yeah, my utility
bills. You don't
bills,
use your heat.
Sometimes we don't even, in the wintertime, we're not even turning on the heat because we're in a building that's built right. It's newer, new construction, high efficiency. Now, the other thing that you mentioned, and this is really more of what you hear, is, Well, when I sell the home will be worth a lot more money. And we did a scenario where somebody that I know had a home that now they're going to be selling. They're going to be getting around $400,000 for the home. Now, they're going to have some cost from the sale, but maybe they walk away, even if they walk away with like $370. Let's say they walk away with $370. They paid $100,000 over 30 years ago for this home, right? So it looks like they made a lot of money. It looks like they paid $100,000 and they now are selling. They're going to make $275,000, and that seems like, wow, they did pretty good. But it's really horrible when you think about it, and this is what people don't think about. When they bought the home, they put $20,000 down. So I just did this, and you could do it. You could go on Google and get a financial calculator, investment calculator. If they would have taken the money, I think they bought the house in 1990. If they would have taken the money that they put down, they spent $20,000 to get into the property. Mm-hmm. If they would have put the $20,000 in the S&P 500, and they would have rented, or they would have found, I don't know, if they would have bought another home or bought an investment property or whatever. But let's just say the $20,000 they put in the S&P 500 in 1990, the value of that today would be over $800,000. Now that sounds
incredible.
That's people will be like, let me check this. Yeah, you should. You should go on Google and do a financial calculator and say, if I took $20,000 in 1990 and put it in the S&P 500, what's the value today? You're going to find out. It's worth double what they are netting from the sale. And along the way, though, what people are not realizing is they lost money all this time by having equity in the house that they weren't investing. Yep. They also spent a lot of money. They did a new roof twice. They did a new kitchen. They did a new HVAC system. They had to do carpets. They painted. They put wallpaper. So there's all this work that they did all along. Plus, all those 30 plus years, they paid real estate taxes, they paid interest, they paid insurance taxes, they paid for maintenance, they did all these repairs. So it looks like they made $275, but you got to deduct all those things, and then they have their buying cost and selling cost and all those repairs. You got to deduct all that, take that into consideration. So it's significantly less. They lost out on income that they would have gotten along the way if they had that equity. And remember, the initial money that they had in 1990 would have turned into almost $1 million.
That's incredible, like, especially when you talk about the numbers. And we're numbers guys when it comes to the investing. And that's $800,000, and it'd have been a peace of mind. The money's
they wouldn't have had to work. They wouldn't have done nothing.
Yeah, that's incredible. We went over a lot of stuff today. It was a good discussion. Let's do a little, sum up of what we went over. Why the benefits of renting a home versus buying a primary residence. So if you're renting a home and then investing in money to go buy an investment property, one, the income generation.
Cash flow.
Investment properties can provide a steady stream of rental income, potentially covering or exceeding mortgage payments. That's one. The appreciation that you touched on a little bit when you were talking. Real estate values tend to appreciate over time. We have multiple properties that we bought in Philly that we got them for the right number. We did a small renovation on them. And now, just right now, it's not even been 10 years. They're worth, probably 30, 40% more than what we bought them for. Yep. So that's with including doing the renovation. So that's big. The tax advantages. Investment property owners can benefit from various tax deductions that a regular homeowner
always
can't get. And flexibility. Buying investment property can offer greater flexibility in your living situation. I know you've lived in houses, you lived in apartments, but if you wanted to, you can be like, all right, I'm tired of living here and go, live somewhere else without
having to go through putting the house on the market, incurring all the selling costs, going through the staging and the people walking through the house and fighting with buyers and all that.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah. You can, if you wanted to walk away from your lease, all right, you might have to pay a small fee or just wait another couple of months and you can leave.
Yes.
And be gone.
Yeah.
So that's always good. And one of the biggest things that me and Dan believe in with this buying, investment property is you got to think about it this way. You don't need to own a home on the way up to building yourself up. You don't need to go out and buy a forever home when you first get out of college. You need to own assets that pay you on the way up so you can level up. Then in 5 to 10 years, once you get the cash flow going, that's when you can go out and buy your $1 million home or that $100,000 car that you want. So think about that. We had a lot of different, takes on the idea of buying an investment property throughout this discussion today. But we hope, you guys enjoyed the podcast, and you can stay tuned for our second one next week. And thanks for joining us. Always be closing, guys.
Thanks for checking us out.